Coming up, the disorder affecting more than 55 million people around the world.
When the final diagnosis of Alzheimer's was given, the emotions were overwhelming.
We dissect the often misunderstood diseases of dementia and the elements slowly eating away at memory and thinking skills. That's why these accumulations that form are so difficult, or I guess impossible to remove.
Oh, wow. Well, that would be so hard.
And a new study claims air pollution could increase the risk of Alzheimer's, but some scientists are skeptical.
People say that you get a higher chance to get Alzheimer's disease because they find more cases of Alzheimer's disease close to a polluted area, etc. But that doesn't mean that the pollution causes the disease.
Just 2 degrees starts right now.
I do not like too much these studies because I like the studies if they would make the right conclusions.
Worldwide, billions of dollars have been poured into researching and treating dementias. Alzheimer's is one of them. It's still not fully understood, and symptoms can vary from person to person. But memory problems are typically one of the first signs.
As many of us live our lives, we sometimes take connections, experiences, lessons, joy, and pain for granted. But as every moment passes, we get to keep the memories. For many, there are stories. They make us who we are. But what would happen if your memories, little by little, began to slip away? For those struggling with Alzheimer's, that's life.
J'oublie beaucoup de choses, j'oublie beaucoup quoi. Je ne me rappelle plus des dates, jusqu'à présent je me rappelais des dates, des jours et tout, puis maintenant j'oublie tout. Voilà.
Alzheimer's is the most common type of dementia, a general term for those whose ability to remember, think, or make everyday decisions is severely impaired. Early signs include getting lost in familiar places, misplacing things, trouble handling money, and changes in mood, personality, or behavior, and they worsen over time. The brain starts to change long before these symptoms show up, usually in people 65 years or older, though early onset Alzheimer's can show up in one's 30s or 40s. At first, it damages the connections between neurons in the brain that involve learning and memory. Later, it affects the parts of the cerebral cortex that govern language, reasoning, and social skills. It's usually diagnosed when doctors and family notice that the symptoms interfere with daily function. Average life expectancy after diagnosis is 8 to 10 years, though some live longer. Alzheimer's is still being studied, but experts say it has multiple causes or potential risk factors, including age, genetics, lifestyle, and environment. Certain conditions also raise the risk, including diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, and depression. For sufferers, it's frightening to forget, and hard for their loved ones to watch them slowly slip away.
My mom, she's aware of things. She can articulate, like saying, but just on her emotions, my mom has single words. And sometimes she has more emotions with her hands. Sometimes we speak with our hands a lot.
China has the largest number of Alzheimer's patients, at more than 10 million people according to a Beijing report. Finland has the highest rate of Alzheimer's patients, with more than 54 per 100,000 people. In the US, studies suggest Hispanic and Black populations are most at risk. Women are twice as likely to have it as men, mainly because they live longer, and old age is the biggest risk factor. In the advanced stages of the disease, loss of brain function can lead to complications that cause death. There are treatments to temporarily reduce or control some symptoms, approaches that reassure and comfort sufferers, coping and adaptation strategies are getting better to improve the quality of life.
Alors, en fait, pour des personnes qui ont maladie d'Alzheimer, qui sont en perte de repère, partir en EHPAD, partir dans une grande institution, ça va avec beaucoup de désorientation. Ce sont des grands établissements médicalisés qui ne ressemblent pas à des maisons. L'avantage ici, c'est que c'est une petite maison où il y a 8 colocataires. On retrouve les codes et les repères de là où on a vécu, là où on a habité. On connaît les gens, on connaît les moindres recoins de la maison. Et donc c'est un lieu où on peut vivre bien sans être désorienté, sans perdre ses repères, comme c'est le cas en EHPAD.
Alzheimer's disease is not only tough for those struggling to cope with it, but difficult for their families too.
I met Jose when we were both in the United States Army. Actually, I was a first lieutenant in the Army Nurse Corps.
Wow, she was beautiful. And she is beautiful. She's a beautiful person inside and outside. And I just said that this is the one right here. This is the one.
Jose asked me to marry him 4 months into knowing him. He deployed to Somalia, Africa for a year while I planned the wedding. And then he came back just in time for us to get married. The first glaring sign was in September of 2013, which would have been our 20th wedding anniversary. And the day came and went without any awareness of the date. And Jose doesn't forget anniversaries. He doesn't forget special occasions at all. We attribute it to being overworked and exhaustion and a heavy schedule. And then 2014 came, and he forgot the next anniversary. And I said, there's something not right. He'd had PET scans, he'd had MRIs, and he had CTs, but it was the amyloid PET scan that was the confirmation. When the final diagnosis of Alzheimer's was given, the emotions were overwhelming. My hope became fragile at best.
I felt that I had let my family down. I felt like that I allowed myself to go down in some way, and just sadness.
When I first reached out to the Alzheimer's Association, I needed an uncomplicated lifeline. They made it as easy and gentle as they possibly could in receiving us into a support group. It was kind, it was professional, it was filled with information, and that's what I needed.
Being engaged with the Alzheimer's Association has worked out well for us.
When we were at the Walk to End Alzheimer's, it was so encouraging. It's very positive, and you're just out there and you're trying to get a message out.
I really enjoy going to the program, and it makes me feel better. The people who I'm there with are with Alzheimer's, and so we all have a bond.
I had done my own research with the Alzheimer's Association, and there's a really good website that we were able to use in order to get a better understanding of what Alzheimer's was.
But most of our resources have come from the Alzheimer's Association. And so the pamphlets and the education.
I've called the Alzheimer's Association. The 24/7 helpline, our children know that if they see a behavior, if I'm not around, that they can call that helpline 24/7. It's that secret safety net that exists that you always know is available. I believe that in life, you either pay up front or you pay on the back end. And Jose paid into this marriage up front, and it is my honor. It is my absolute honor to care for him.
Well, every day you wake up, you want hope. And so I stick with that and move forward.
The Alzheimer's Association helped us to see this disease differently. It helped us to see it with hope, to see it with possibility. And it made me see that there is the reality of living with Alzheimer's disease.
So doctor, from my basic conversation with several people, they seem unsure about exactly what Alzheimer's is and how it differs from other forms of dementia. Firstly, help us understand what exactly is a dementia.
Dementia is actually a loss of some of the functional abilities of a normal person, so that they cannot perform, they cannot go on their lives as they were doing before. And Alzheimer's is the most frequent form of dementia. So people usually don't understand if they're separate things, if they're the same thing. So we could say that, dementia is a generic term that comprises Alzheimer's disease, like Parkinson's disease dementia, vascular dementia. And Alzheimer's disease is the most frequent form of dementia, which comprises about like 70% of the disease.
Can you explain simply what is happening in the brain that causes Alzheimer's?
Yeah, sure. I will try to explain as simple as possible. So we have a deposition of several proteins in the brain. First, the amyloid deposition starts in the brain, and then it takes about like 20 years until we see a dysfunction of the brain. We might still have an amyloid deposition, but we wouldn't have any clinical problems. And after a while, we also have another protein called tau protein. I won't go much further in detail. It's mostly accumulated in the memory regions of the brain, which is called hippocampus. And it is deep in the brain. So after that, we start having a problem with recording. It's like a tape recorder, and you have this order with the recording button, okay? So it first initially doesn't go away completely. For example, you push the button 10 times and you record like 8 times, but you don't record 2 times. So you think, actually, my button is working correctly. However, the problem starts slightly and then goes on and on. And after that, the problem actually goes to other areas, like, planning, like finding places and so on. So it goes to the further other regions of the brain.
I heard you stressing the words deep in the brain. So I guess that's why these accumulations that form are so difficult, or I guess impossible to remove.
Oh, wow. Well, that would be so hard because, the thing is, amyloid deposition is not actually deep. It is actually very much generally accumulated in the brain. However, the tau protein, which kills, which leads to more destroying of the cells in the hippocampal region, is in the deep region. So it's like millions of molecules. It's really not possible to remove it easily. However, now we have new drugs, like we call them anticorps, which bind to amyloid protein and delay formation of tau proteins and delay the progression of the clinical course. These drugs that are actually very new, and they just got one of them just got FDA approval last year. So it's really not an easy process, I would say.
Let's go back to the start and talk about if science has figured out what actually causes Alzheimer's. And I understand that women are more susceptible to getting it, I guess, because they live longer. So is Alzheimer's connected with the length of life?
That is very correct, actually. Alzheimer's is mainly a disease of elderly, and it starts after the age of 65. And then every 5 years, the frequency just doubles. So the longer you live, the more risk you have, and women generally tend to live longer. Further, most women don't have the same approaches that men have. For example, men have like more complex jobs, but women could be housewives. They might be engaging in more mentally enhancing activities themselves. And furthermore, the menopause, after the menopause, the withdrawal of estrogen and so on, it might make women more prone to the disease.
This might be a stretch of a question. So does it mean that if someone lives a long time, that they will get Alzheimer's?
I wouldn't say 100%, but yes, the risk definitely increases. I could tell you that after the age of 94, only 25% of the people have normal cognition. The other start to have some problems, but we cannot call all of them dementia. But like about 40 to 50% of this age group would have dementia, unfortunately.
Are there external factors that increase someone's susceptibility or risk to getting a dementia or Alzheimer's?
There are many factors, I would say. The first one is if you have like a sedentary lifestyle, if you didn't have high numbers of education, you just graduated from primary school, and if you didn't use your brain much, and it really is sort of I will make an analogy like muscle. If you use it, it really grows, the connections grow, and you have like a more active brain. But if you don't, you lose what you have more easily. For example, if you're making sports, it is very good for the brain. It's like the most natural enhancer, and it has some neuronal growth factors secreted. So the brain loves sports more than the body, I would say. So if you're making sports, or like if you're dancing, even dancing, it decreases the risk of Alzheimer's like to 70%. And other than that, whatever the heart loves, the brain loves it too. All the factors that are included for the health of heart are good for the brain, because it's basically the well-being of the vessels, okay? So like if you have diabetes, you should have it under control. If you have hypertension, you should have it under control. And you shouldn't be very obese in the middle ages. You shouldn't drink too much. You shouldn't smoke. And you should be hearing well. It's really important. You should have the information coming to your brain.
Pollution enters the Earth's atmosphere in several ways. Most air pollution is human-induced, taking the form of emissions from factories, cars, planes, or aerosol cans. There can also be natural events like forest fires or volcanic eruptions that contaminate the air. Worldwide, close to 7 million people die annually from the effects.
Pollutants alter the natural state of the air we breathe. Some come from natural sources, such as smoke from wildfires or ash from volcanoes. But humans contribute a fair share too, from the factories we work in to the cars we drive and the burning of oil and gas. Carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, and sulfur dioxide all pose major threats to public health. Data from the World Health Organization shows air pollution is the 4th leading cause of death worldwide after high blood pressure, tobacco use, and dietary risks. Exposure is linked to reproductive health issues, respiratory illnesses, and diseases like dementia and Parkinson's. And it's low and middle income countries that suffer from the highest exposure, with cities in Pakistan, Peru, and Egypt among the worst polluted in the world. But even in higher income countries, groups in lower socioeconomic brackets tend to be disproportionately impacted. Researchers at the University of Illinois found that Black and Hispanic Americans are more exposed to high levels of air pollution, as they tend to live near highways, chemical plants, and refineries. And indoor air pollution is often worse than the outdoors. Research conducted in the UK studied air purifiers connected to the My Dyson app in nearly 40 countries between 2022 and 2023.
What the data tells us is that small particulate pollution, so that's PM2.5, really small particles, are more prevalent indoors than outdoors. When we start to think about why that might be, all the outdoor sources of air pollution can potentially come into the home through ventilation, through cracks around windows, under doors, etc.
Whether it's inside or out, researchers identified 2 types of toxic pollutants. One is PM2.5, an invisible element that's released through the combustion of gas, oil, or diesel. The second are volatile organic compounds. They're generated when we sweep or dust our homes, or when we cook using gas or coal stoves, or when we use deodorants, body sprays, and candles.
Well, a new study suggests exposure to air pollution could increase the risk of Alzheimer's. We reached out to the researchers who conducted the study, but they all declined an interview. We instead spoke with Dr. Bart de Strooper, the director of the UK Dementia Research Institute, and he had some very interesting things to say.
Can you describe what is APOE, or apolipoprotein E gene, and what it's responsible for?
That's a very interesting question. That's the major, well, the apolipoprotein E is a gene which is involved in cholesterol metabolism. And we have it all people have it, of course, but there are three variants of it, E2, E3, and E4. And so if you have the E4 variant, we know that you have a 4 to 12 times higher risk to get Alzheimer's disease than if you have the E3 variant. And if you have the E2 variant, your risk decreases with 2 to 3 times. So it's a very interesting gene because it modulates your risk for Alzheimer's disease.
Interesting. And is there a general connection between cholesterol levels and Alzheimer's?
Yeah, that's of course the question now, but ApoE has a lot of different functions, not only cholesterol transport, it's also involved in inflammation. It has an important role in the vasculature, etc. And so the jury is still out whether it's cholesterol or whether it's something of these other things which is involved in its important effect in Alzheimer's disease, of course.
And you've seen this study posted in the neurology publication about the effects of air pollution on the risk of Alzheimer's. What's your take on it?
Yes, so there are many studies like that, and not only on air pollution, but also on living close to a road or other kinds. The problem with these studies is that it's correlation. So people say that you get a higher chance to get Alzheimer's disease because they find more cases of Alzheimer's disease close to a polluted area, etc. But that doesn't mean that the pollution causes the disease. So it's very important to make that difference, because what you basically make is a correlation between an unhealthy situation and your general health. So if you would ask the same question for heart disease or for longevity, you would probably find the same outcome. So it's not specific Alzheimer's disease or dementia which is increased because of pollution, it's your general health. And that's very important to make that difference.
Do you think there are particles in the air that's responsible for whatever happens in our body that results in Alzheimer's?
No, that's the thing. That's the difference. If it would be causal, then you would assume that this is the case. But now you see just the general effect on general health. And I don't think that this type of studies can make a difference. To find a causal thing, you should put a person or an animal for a couple of months in polluted air and in clean air, and you would need to see whether the person gets Alzheimer or the mouse or the test animal gets Alzheimer's or not. And so that type of proof has not been delivered. And the problem is that if you correlate something, there are always 50 or 60 other things. So if you say these people are more exposed to polluted air, that's probably because they live in houses close to a factory or close to a busy road. And that means usually that these people have a lower income and that they are in the lower, well, I don't like to think in classes, but that's how you would express it. And so what we know for any health study, for anything, people who has a lower income, who are at the less rich side of the society, they score on all health measurements worse. Their tooth are less good cared for. They will die earlier. They will get lung disease. They have more cancer, etc. And so basically, I do not like too much these studies because I like the studies if they would make the right conclusions, but these correlations suggest a causal relationship and they misled the priorities in the research. So for Alzheimer's disease, we know that it's the genetics which is the most important risk factor. And so I want to investigate that and clear that first before we start to look to these correlations, which basically make studies very complicated.
And that's our show. But before we leave you, a blanket of fog covered New York City in late February. A recent study found that every year, 1 in 4 Americans is exposed to air quality that's characterized as unhealthy. To reduce air pollution, city officials advise reducing energy use at home, ride the subway or use a bike to get around, and follow local car idling regulations. Those are laws about how long a car's engine is left running when it's not in motion.
Give me a sign if you can see me. Tell me I'm safe, and then you'll be there. Make a vow to reach me. Give me a sign and save my breath tonight. Give me a sign.